Hello, my name is Lindsay Clandfield, and in this video session we're going to be talking about warmers, fillers, and closers, three popular elements of any language teacher's lesson. Let's begin by defining our terms. At its very most basic, the warmer is something that happens at the beginning of a lesson, a filler is something that happens during the lesson, and a closer is something that happens at the end of the lesson. Each of these elements tends to be something that is outside of the main lesson plan. It's sort of added onto it, but it's not part of the core lesson plan. Let's start with warmers. Warmers, in the literature, there's sometimes been a distinction drawn between three things that could happen at the beginning of a lesson or a lesson stage. The first is a lead-in. This is to be contrasted with an icebreaker, and this is to be contrasted with a warmer. So a lead-in is an activity that leads into the topic or a language point or an element of that stage. So you may have several stages in a lesson, and different stages may have different lead-ins. An icebreaker is a bit different. That's usually an activity that happens at the beginning of a whole course where the aim is for students to break the ice, to get to know each other's names, where the teacher can get to know the students a bit more and to sort of relax the atmosphere. Now contrast both of these, the lead-in and the icebreaker, with the warmer. And the warmer is something that usually happens at the beginning of a whole lesson. This can serve the purpose. It might not always be completely part of the lesson. It may be something that works towards building a group dynamic, or focusing a group before you begin, or switching focus from one thing to another. Okay? A filler is an activity that usually happens during the lesson, between stages. So you may have done a very long reading activity with the learners, and then you're going to move on to, let's say, some grammar activity. There may be some kind of filler between the end of one and the beginning of the next one, especially if you're conscious that you've been moving quite quickly through the material. Sometimes a filler is a useful thing to have to slow the pace down of the class so you don't finish with sort of 15 or 20 minutes at the end where you don't know what to do. And at the end, a closer is an activity that wraps up the lesson, either by reviewing some material that had been covered in the lesson, or doing a different kind of activity to wrap up the whole lesson. It's a way of closing off the classroom experience for everyone together so that students know when it's time to pack up their bags and leave the class. Okay. Before I look at different examples, I'd like to look at what makes a good warmer, filler, or closer. So let's start with some basic principles. The first thing that I'd like to suggest about any three of these elements is that whatever activity you use for them should not be too long. It's very tempting and very possible for a warmer to end up becoming almost half of the lesson if you're not careful. And then you don't get to the end part of the lesson, or you don't achieve the aims that you set out for that lesson. The same thing can be said of a filler. I've observed teachers who finish one activity and they feel they're ahead of time, so they have a filler activity before they move on to the next stage, and the filler activity suddenly becomes really long. And by the same token, a closer, if it becomes too long, everyone's looking at their watches, they want to leave the class, and your closer activity has become a full long thing. So, rule number one, it shouldn't be too long. Rule number two is, I believe, not always the case, but wherever possible, it's more of an elegant solution where the warmer, filler, or closer links in some way to something else within the lesson. Okay, so that it doesn't feel just sort of suddenly tacked on and coming out of nowhere. So ideally, they all kind of form a part. They might not be linked 100% to the topic of the lesson or the language point, but there should be some kind of way that they could easily transition from one thing to another. The third principle would be that your linker, your warmer, your filler, or your closer does not appear to be more important than the other activities that surround it. If the main point of your lesson is a grammar or vocabulary point, or the main purpose is developing practice in reading skills or listening skills, and you have a warmer that seems to be far more important and students are taking more notes on the warmer, then you've perhaps allotted too much importance to that. Same thing for a filler or a closer. By the same token, I'd suggest that a good warmer, filler, or closer does not add too much new or unknown language. If the objective of this activity is to be short, to act as a transition, opening, or closing, it shouldn't be an activity which introduces new language requiring more explanation from the teacher, more note-taking, more emphasis than is necessary. So, those are my 4 principles for good warmers, fillers, or closers. Let's just quickly review those. 1, not too long. 2, wherever possible, connecting to the topic or the theme of the lesson. 3, should not appear to be more important than the main activities which it's surrounding or coming after. And 4, should not introduce new or unknown language, not too much anyway. Okay, so let's take a look at our warmers, okay? A warmer at the beginning of a lesson as we said, can serve different purposes. It can help build a group dynamic. It could help calm a group down if everyone's come in and they're all chatting to each other and sort of not really focused into the English lesson. You can use a warmer to calm people down and focus them. It can get students ready to listen or read or speak in English, okay? By doing a warmer, which sort of warms up to the topic or the kind of activity that they're going to do, it can help focus students and move them into an English space. If you teach students who all speak the same language and are all speaking the same language when they come in, a warmer can establish that this is now an English-speaking space. And so getting people used to sort of switching to speaking to each other in English. Sometimes a warmer can activate schema. So this is a term often used when discussing reading or listening texts. The schema is the world knowledge you bring to a text before you're about to read it. So to activate the schema is to get you thinking about that. So if you were doing a reading on the geography of the Americas, for example, a warmer on geographical places or on famous geographical sites or on the Americas in general would be helping to activate the schema, thinking about the Americas, geography, etc., before moving into the main topic of the lesson. Okay, what are some of my favorite warmers? I like warmers that usually connect to the topic of the lesson. So often at the beginning of a lesson, here's one thing that very simple one that I like to do is find a word that is one of the main words to cover the topic of our lesson, a nice long word. So let's say geography, to use the example I was saying before. I might write the letters of that word up on the board in a jumbled way. So when the students come in, they see all these letters on the board. And I say our first task before we begin the lesson is I want you in pairs to look at the letters on the board and make as many words in English as you can in 2 minutes. Go. Okay? So they start brainstorming words. And I say, if any pair can, there is one word that uses all the letters on the board. And so they do this for a couple of minutes. I give them 2 minutes. We feed back as a class. And then I say, did anyone get the word which has all the letters in it? Geography. Good. Now open your books, or we're going to do a reading, or here's a listening we're going to do about geography. That's one warmer that I quite like. Another one that I enjoy is using questions. These are questions that I might prepare myself on the topic in English that I would ask in an open class. This could be even in a large class, asking different students the same question about the topic that we're going to be dealing with, or asking students to ask me questions. So sometimes I'll say, okay, here's a topic. I want you each to think and ask me a question in English based on this topic. Okay. Finally, a third warmer, which can be quite fun, is if you have a projector and you're able to project an image from your laptop or the internet on the board is to learn how to take the image out of focus. So you find your big image before the students come in, have it on the board, but have it out of focus. So they should only see a blur, a very blurry thing at the beginning. As they come in and they see on the board, don't say anything, let everyone settle in, and then say, by the way, you'll have noticed there's an image on the board, but it's not in focus. I want you to each work in pairs and make 2 guesses as to what this image is. So they do that, then you put it in focus a little bit more. Work in pairs again, make another guess. A little bit more, until the image has come into focus. This may be an image that has come from the material you're teaching or is slightly related to it. But what you've done is in that warmer, you have raised expectations. You've gotten them predicting what the content they might be seeing, maybe some words or vocabulary is coming up as they're doing that. Those are sort of specific warmers. Some teachers like to have warmers which are recurring warmers. Okay, Jim Scrivener, the methodologist and writer, has written about this. A recurring warmer is the kind of activity which is the same thing every day. So for example, it may be a quote of the day written in the corner of the board. When the students come in, one of them reads out the quote of the day and everybody has to discuss it. Do they agree, disagree, like, dislike? Same thing could be a headline from the news written on the board. Students work in pairs, discuss what they know about the headline, feedback as a class. Same thing goes for a proverb. Sometimes some teachers like to have a warmer that they begin each class with a joke. So these would be recurring warmers, or sort of a recurring theme, a running warmer. Okay? So, warmers. Those are some of my favorite warmers. Let's turn now to fillers. Fillers, as we said before, are activities that come between stages of a lesson to sort of fill the space or add or act as a transition. They can have 3 different purposes. One is a filler can provide a change of lesson pace or lesson tempo. So if you've been doing a lot of heads down, reading, they've spent a long time reading, a lot of quiet stuff, it might be a time for the teacher to say, all right, everybody, time to stand up. I want you to stand up with a partner, look at your partner and do this other activity or something like that. So it provides a change of lesson pace, tempo, and energy in the room. Okay? It can also a filler can also be useful to vary patterns of interaction. By that I mean if they've been doing a lot of solo work, this is a good way to get them into pairs or into groups. If they've been working with one partner, a filler activity can be an excuse to get students to move around and change partners to work with somebody else. Fillers are also used and useful for the teacher if you find that you're moving too quickly through your material. So it's always good to have some fillers up your sleeve. That being said, let's turn now to what some good fillers are, some favorite fillers. I think if you've finished a grammar or vocabulary point, a filler can serve as an extension to that. This could mean that students are making their own sample sentences or exercise types based on that language. If you are wanting to extend a reading or a listening, one favorite filler of mine, if we've finished a reading task or a listening, is to ask students to close their books or put the text away so they can't see it, and then I begin reading it out again to them. At key moments, I will pause and maybe whistle or just say, eh. So I would say the difference between a warmer and a shh. And the students who have already seen the text once or twice have to try to remember what the missing word is, and they have to call out the missing word. And then I keep going like that. I'll keep reading it out, and every once in a while giving a little gap. This could be even done as a whistle dictation. So you read the text out, and every time you whistle or make the beep noise, students have to write down the word that they think is missing. They then compare with a partner, and you correct all of this stuff together. Finally, let's turn to closers. Okay, closers, to look at the purpose of a closer, would be to wrap up a lesson or a stage of a lesson. I'd also say a good closer can serve as a review or revision of the lesson, sort of as a way of bringing the group experience to a close by looking back on what we've done. I would suggest that a piece of advice about closers is don't draw attention to something that didn't happen. By this, I mean, sometimes teachers in their closing sort of activity, they say, you know, I had this really fun game that I prepared for all of us, but we only have 2 minutes, so I can't do it. That's brings the lesson to a bit of a depressing end. You know, there was something really nice, but we didn't have time to do it. So a closer shouldn't be bringing up something that didn't happen. Sample closers I like is asking students to gather a series of words from the lesson. So I say, all right, what I want you to do is I want you to make a list of 4 words that you think are going to be useful from this lesson. There have been variations done on this. My colleague Philip Kerr talks about an activity which asks students to take words that they think were important from the lessons, words that they think they would never use from the lessons, and words which they had already seen or were reviewing. So you're kind of gathering words from the lesson and categorizing them as useful, not useful, already known, etc. A fun game that I like to do at the end if I have time is, it goes by various names. Sometimes it's called the hot seat. Sometimes it's called back to the board. So I invite a student to sit in front of the class. I write a word on the board behind that student, and other students have to call out words or expressions or definitions to make that student guess the word. And then we kind of rotate around. Sometimes what I have done with larger classes is I have asked students to each submit a question about something, like a question in English. This is for low levels, sort of like, what's your favorite animal? Or what do you like to do in the mornings? Or something like that. So I have several questions that they've submitted, just general get to know you questions. And as a closing routine, I have these questions all written on little pieces of paper in a cup. And I draw from the cup and I read someone's question out and then nominate someone else to answer it. This has the advantage of one person who is answering is kind of in the spotlight, but everyone is listening out for the question that they had suggested. This is especially good with large classes. Finally, a way of finishing a lesson can be with sort of a review where students self-assess what they have done. So this could be a series of very simple sentences, something like, now I can, I feel comfortable about, I understand, I think I need to study more, So you write those sentence stems on the board. Students then copy those out in their notebook and fill them out with their own ideas. Compare in pairs, feedback as a group. Finally, just as we said that some teachers have opening and warmer routines, you can have closing routines as your closer. These could be routines such as setting the homework, chanting out a song if you're teaching younger learners, although I've even had some adult learners who enjoy singing a song or doing some kind of chant at the end of the lesson, filling in a diary, a learning diary with things, or doing a completely different sort of re-energize activity with movement, some kind of thing. I observed one class where at the end of every class, the teacher had the students stand up, face each other, and then had to mirror each other's movements, but they weren't allowed to smile. First person to smile kind of lost the game, and then they all left. So there we have it. That's been warm. We've looked at principles for good warmers, fillers, and closers. We've defined our terms. We've looked at each in turn, and I've shared some of my favorite activities in each of those categories. Thank you very much.